And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. We are live once again in the Eric Boyd trial out of Tennessee. The man who is accused of having direct involvement in the abduction, rape, torture, beating, and murder of two young people. On the stand right now is Jimmy Jones. He's a former Knox County administrative chief. He had an opportunity to interview Mr. Boyd's co-defendants. Let's go live. Okay, this is interesting testimony right here because he's recounting a conversation he had with George Thomas, somebody who testified earlier today, a co-defendant, that he was pointing the finger at Eric Boyd very at the beginning, that Eric Boyd was the one who drove Christopher Newsom away, and he came back alone, implicating that he's the one, Mr. Boyd is the one who actually murdered Mr. Newsom. So let's get some perspective here on what exactly all this means. Joining me back is very special trial attorney Terri Austin. Terri, great to see you.
Good morning.
Now, this is an important witness. This is an important moment. They're trying to corroborate the testimony of Thomas, but at the end of the day, isn't this still all based on the word of a convicted murderer?
Absolutely it is. And so it's important here to show that not just only the co-defendant is saying these things, but someone he spoke to way back early on when the events occurred. So this person took a statement, and the statement is consistent with what Thomas said on the stand. So that will help the prosecution and hurt the defense.
The question that I have is, Boyd is charged with a plethora of crimes, and we can't forget that he was originally convicted of being an accessory after the fact. He's serving an 18-year prison sentence. His involvement was minimal, if that's the word you want to use. Now he's being accused of being a direct participant in everything that happened. So far what we have, though, is testimony. We don't have corroborating physical evidence yet. I mean, a little bit here and there in terms of his car and what was found in his car, but that other level of DNA evidence or surveillance footage or something like that, we don't have that yet.
That's the best thing that the defense has going for them. And I think that's why he wasn't convicted early on. There was no DNA, there was no physical evidence. And in fact, if I'm on the jury, I'm asking myself, why didn't you convict him before?
That's a good point, and that's probably something they might, well, maybe that's something they might be thinking. We'll take a break right now. When we come back, we're waiting for a new witness to take the stand. Exciting day in that Tennessee courtroom. We'll be back. And Terri, that makes sense that the defense wouldn't cross-examine this witness, right? That was a right move for them to do.
Nothing to ask her. I mean, it would just look horrible if the defense tried in any way, shape, or form to blame the victim. So he just said no questions. Right move.
It's a difficult case when you think about her, because not only does she have to relive this, but remember, this is the fifth person who's been put on trial. How many times has she had to provide testimony and questions and answers? It's just, it must be an exhausting ordeal. And what is she talking about? She's talking about the brutal death of her son.
It is a mother's worst nightmare to have your child not only die before you, but to have your child brutally murdered. She testified that she didn't think about anything else. She was just useless for 2 weeks afterwards.
There was a statement that was made earlier on in court when it was the cross-examination of George Thomas, where they tried to elaborate, isn't it, you know, the family should have an understanding of what happened to their children, you know, what happened to their loved ones. And the idea is, as disturbing as it is, as horrible as it is, it's important for them to understand the circumstances of their deaths.
It's critical. It has to put closure around what happened. You want to know, just so you can understand what the child was going through, even if it's very difficult.
It is very difficult. Well, on the stand, we're going to continue on. This is Tina Christian. This is Shannon Christian's mother. Again, this should be an important moment. You know, Terri, what's interesting is we have an opportunity to read all about the victims because we're not on that jury, but that jury is not really supposed to know too much about this case before, or anything before they are assigned jury duty. And so the question is, you know, is it important for the state to put on these witnesses to say, let's talk about who these victims were, what their day was like, who they were, and it's important for the jury to get that overall perspective.
You hit it right on the head. That's exactly why these witnesses are going up, so the jury can understand who they are, personalize it so they can feel for the victims. I mean, they're also establishing a timeline, but the most important thing is that they understand who these people were.
And they had no relation to the defendants.
That's right, yes.
That's the disturbing aspect. It's a complete random act of violence.
And I'm sure that the girl's mom, who was just on the stand, is thinking to herself, it was the car that brought these random defendants to her daughter. And so it's a horrible thing to relive and think about what ifs.
Yeah, because you don't know that they weren't by all accounts, stalking them for days beforehand. It was just a random act that ended in the most awful way possible. We'll take a break. When we come back, we will be live in Tennessee. Terri, does it get any more real than this? You hear the words of a mother who is trying to understand where her daughter is and obviously getting defensive when it comes to insinuations that she went out to go get drugs. It's a really incredible thing to watch.
It could not get more real. And this mother, good for her. She's like an investigator. And it makes you think about the fact, what if she hadn't gone down to look because of the ping of the telephone for her own daughter's car? She's an investigator herself because she's looking at how the seat is, and I think all of that information really does help the prosecution, helps the police.
Who knows her daughter better than her? You
That's
know what I
right.
mean? It's one thing for an investigator to look at something and think is off, but her seeing something and thinking it's off as well. At the end of the day, though, how much does this really impact Boyd?
I think that the jury is thinking to themselves, this is a human being. I think it's going to impact Boyd because the jury wants to do something on behalf of these poor victims. These victims are now being humanized,
right?
And that's not going to help the defense.
But at the same point, they're only supposed to base their judgment not on emotion, but on fact and law. Having said this, we are, as you said, establishing a timeline and understanding of when Shannon went missing. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be live. All right, so as they are IDing items that belong to Shannon, including a Blockbuster card, gives you an idea of how long ago this is, kind of the predates social media. What do you think the jury's thinking about all of this?
You know, if you recall, Jesse, they saw all of this when the police officers picked up this information and they marked it as evidence. So the jury's seeing this a second time now with the mom. Had I been the prosecution, I probably would have just had a small conversation with the police officer to establish custody and control, and then had the mom go through all of this one by one, because the jury's probably tired of seeing these pictures at this point.
The other side of it is that it's the mother who's going through these items, and maybe it's different for them to hear it, you know, from a mother's perspective. As you said earlier, she knows her daughter better than any investigator could.
That's right, and I think that's why they're putting it through this again with the mother, because she is personalizing each and every one of those items. If you recall, she said that picture her daughter put in her car to tease her because it was a very young picture of her, very personal.
Just shows you how tragic this ultimate case is, and when you learn about the details of the family members, what they went through, and this frantic search to find out what happened to their loved ones, it's just horrifying. Terri, you're going to stay around, so stick around. I'm going to be signing off, but you are in good hands because Angelica Spanos is coming on to guide you through the next chapter of this trial. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll be live. Stay tuned.